The Galactic Council chamber was a sight to behold, an immense and awe-inspiring space that seemed to stretch endlessly. Seated around a massive, circular room, representatives from dozens of species observed with a silent intensity. Each member of the council represented not only their home planet, but also their people, their customs, and their values, all fiercely held. From the towering, armored Bragthians to the ethereal, translucent Azirans, the assembly was a visual tapestry of the galaxy's diversity. The council chamber was a place of order, respect, and protocol. Meetings were somber, weighty, every word calculated and considered, every action reflecting the diplomacy and restraint that bound this diverse coalition together. But today, an unusual air of anticipation hung over the room. The council's eyes, shimmering, blinking, and even pulsing, were fixed on one figure standing confidently at the center of the grand chamber, a human named David Carlson, Earth's young and unorthodox representative. David was a striking contrast to his alien counterparts. Where most council members draped themselves in ceremonial attire or armor, he wore a simple, well-cut suit that looked both out of place and refreshingly straightforward. He appeared relaxed, hands at his sides, a small smile lingering on his face, as if he were casually greeting old friends. But what had everyone's attention wasn't his manner or his appearance. It was his question. "Do you mind?" David had asked moments before. "If I pet your dragon?" The room fell silent, jaws dropping and limbs twitching in shock. The statement seemed to echo, as if the chamber itself couldn't believe what it had just heard. David's words were directed at Counselor Torvak, the formidable representative of Zarla, a species known as much for their keen intellect as for their reverence toward creatures of extraordinary power. Torvak himself, an imposing figure covered in dark, spiked armor, stood beside his Cathar companion, Nira. Nira, as the council well knew, was no ordinary creature. She was a Cathar, a species the galaxy had learned to both fear and respect. Resembling an earth dragon, though somewhat smaller, she had razor-sharp scales that glinted like obsidian, eyes that gleamed with an almost preternatural intelligence, and wings tucked tightly against her powerful frame. Cathars were apex predators, creatures bred and trained for battle and defense, intelligent enough to communicate with their Zarlan handlers, but fiercely loyal, and, as far as anyone knew, impossible to tame. Counselor Torvak's reaction was immediate. His scales rippled a deep shade of crimson, a Zarlan sign of intense agitation. His voice, when he finally responded, was sharp, each word enunciated with an almost mechanical precision. "Human," Torvak said, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Nira is not a pet. She is the pinnacle of evolution, a hunter without equal, a creature whose very presence demands respect. To ask such a question is offensive." David, seemingly unbothered by the rebuke, merely shrugged. "I mean no disrespect, Counselor Torvak. It's just that, on Earth, we've found that even the fiercest animals respond to kindness. I'd like to see if Nira feels the same." This remark sent another ripple of disbelief through the council. Representatives whispered among themselves, their tones hushed but urgent. The Bragthian envoy, a hulking mass of muscles and armor, shook his head, while the Delpha representative's translucent skin flickered in agitation. Torvak's gaze was as cold and sharp as Nira's scales. "The Cathar," he replied icily, "do not respond to kindness. They respond to strength, to dominance. To suggest otherwise is to insult their nature." David's expression softened, and he offered a gentle smile. "Well, with respect, Counselor, perhaps that's the difference between us. We humans have a way with animals, not through dominance, but through understanding." More murmurs filled the room. The idea was unheard of to many council members. To the Zarlans, beasts like Nira were forces to be harnessed, weapons to be wielded. The notion that a Cathar, a creature so feared and respected, could ever respond to something as simple as kindness was beyond their comprehension. David's eyes didn't leave Nira. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand, palm open, as if inviting a friend's pet for a casual greeting. "I'm not asking to change your traditions, Counselor Torvak. I'm simply asking for a chance. Let me approach Nira and see for myself." The silence was palpable as Torvak considered the request. His gaze flicked from David's outstretched hand to the human's unflinching face, searching for some trace of hesitation or doubt. There was none. Against his better judgment, and possibly out of curiosity, Torvak gave a curt nod. "Very well," he said, his tone laced with warning. "But understand this, human. If Nira deems you a threat, she will not hesitate to defend herself. You proceed at your own peril." David nodded, his smile unwavering. "Understood." With cautious steps, he approached Nira. The council watched with bated breath, a mixture of morbid anticipation and genuine curiosity. Nira's sharp, intelligent eyes followed David's every movement. Her body tensed, coiled like a spring ready to explode. A low growl rumbled from deep within her chest, a sound that had frozen warriors and struck fear into even the bravest of creatures. But David didn't falter. As he drew nearer, he maintained eye contact, his expression calm and gentle, exuding a warmth that seemed almost alien in this chamber of steel and stone. He whispered softly, though his words were inaudible to the council. Perhaps it was a reassurance, perhaps a greeting, or simply the human tendency to speak soothingly to animals, a soundless lullaby. Nira's growl intensified, her teeth bare. The council members tensed, some leaning forward, prepared to intervene. But then, to everyone's shock, Nira's posture shifted. The snarl faded, her muscles loosened, and her massive head tilted ever so slightly, almost as if she were curious. David's hand was now inches away from her scales, and the room held its breath. With a final, steadying pause, he placed his hand gently on Nira's head. Her scales were cold and smooth beneath his touch, as unyielding as stone. Yet, to the council's astonishment, Nira didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, a faint rumble escaping her throat. Not a growl, but a sound that could almost be described as contentment. A collective gasp filled the room. Counselor Torvak's expression flickered between disbelief and awe. This moment, this impossibility, had happened right before their eyes. David looked up, his hand still resting on Nira's head. "It's all about trust," he said, his voice steady yet gentle. "Sometimes all it takes is the willingness to try." The council chamber was silent, and for the first time, David sensed something other than skepticism in the council's eyes. It was, perhaps, the first spark of understanding. The council chamber remained steeped in silence as David continued to stroke Nira's scales with a steady, respectful touch. Representatives exchanged glances, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a hint of something rarer, curiosity. For a creature known across the galaxy for its relentless aggression, the fact that Nira had not only tolerated David's approach, but seemed to respond to his touch was nothing short of miraculous. Counselor Torvak, still processing the sight before him, observed David and Nira with a guarded expression, his pride conflicting with the unexpected display of trust. Nira's breathing slowed, and her tense muscles softened further. To everyone watching, it was as if the formidable Cathar had dropped her guard, showing a side that no one, not even her own handler, had seen before. Torvak's gaze darted between David and Nira, his mind racing. To him, Nira was an invaluable asset, not a companion or a creature with emotions to be indulged. Yet here she was, her fierce exterior melting under the hand of a human. David, sensing the eyes upon him, turned to address the council without lifting his hand from Nira's head. "Where I come from," he began, "we believe that animals have their own ways of understanding the world. They sense intentions, and they react to respect just as much as they do to fear." An elderly counselor with wrinkled, feathered skin tilted her head, her eyes sharp with scrutiny. "Human David," she said in a crackling voice, "are you implying that this Cathar, this apex predator, has the capacity for trust?" David nodded, smiling. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Humans have long had relationships with animals that others might see as dangerous. Wolves, eagles, even big cats. Over time, we learned that if you approach them without trying to dominate or control, they often respond in kind. Torvak's eyes narrowed. The Cathar are not comparable to Earth's animals. They are creatures born of survival, trained to be warriors, to be loyal only to their own. To think that such a beast could bond with an outsider is naive. David met Torvak's gaze steadily. Maybe it seems that way, but sometimes all it takes is a different perspective, a willingness to see past the armor, both literal and metaphorical. Nira's eyes were now half closed, a faint rumbling sound emanating from her chest. Those close enough could hear it clearly. It was almost like a purr, a sound no one would have ever associated with the fearsome Cathar. David gently scratched the underside of her jaw, and to the council's continued astonishment, Nira leaned into his hand, her massive body relaxing further. The council members leaned forward in disbelief. The scene was almost too surreal to believe, and yet it was unfolding before their eyes. The Aziran ambassador, a being with a transparent, shimmering body, spoke up, her tone filled with wonder. "Human David, if I may ask, how did you know she would respond to you this way?" David paused, considering his answer. "I didn't," he admitted honestly, "but I trusted that she would sense my intentions. Animals, and I suppose beings like Nira, aren't so different from us in that way. They respond to how we treat them. I simply gave her the chance to make her own choice." A murmur of intrigue spread through the council. The concept was alien to many of them. Their own interactions with creatures like Nira had always been based on control and training, not on mutual respect. Nira's reaction was challenging centuries of ingrained beliefs, and some members visibly wrestled with the implications. Torvak crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Even if this bond were possible, it is still incredibly risky. The Cathar have been known to turn on anyone they perceive as weak. You may have won her favor for now, but such bonds are fragile, human. David nodded, acknowledging the risk. "I understand, Counselor Torvak. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, only that it's a possibility. I respect Nira for who she is, not as a beast to be tamed, but as a being with her own will. That, in itself, can make all the difference." Nira shifted slightly, her massive head leaning closer to David, as if seeking comfort. The council gasped in unison, watching this mighty creature respond to David with such gentleness. Torvak's jaw tightened as he watched, his pride mingling with an emotion he wasn't accustomed to, envy. For years he had trained Nira, molded her into a creature of discipline and strength, but never had he seen her display such openness. One of the counselors leaned toward Torvak, her antennae quivering. "It appears, Counselor Torvak, that Nira has chosen." Torvak's face remained impassive, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of turmoil. He turned back to David, his voice low and firm. "If you are so convinced of this bond, then perhaps you would not be opposed to proving its strength." David looked at Torvak with steady resolve. "I'd welcome it, Counselor." A slight smile played at the corners of Torvak's mouth, though it held no warmth. "Then let us arrange a trial. Let's see if this trust you speak of can hold up under true pressure." A ripple of excitement moved through the council. The notion of a trial was enticing. It would offer a concrete test of David's claims and Nira's supposed bond with him. For many, it was an opportunity to observe and analyze this unprecedented connection from a scientific standpoint. David's face remained composed, though he could feel the weight of what was to come. He had no idea what such a trial would entail, but he knew it would not be easy. He looked down at Nira, who watched him with intelligent, unblinking eyes. He felt a renewed surge of determination. If this trial was the way to prove to the council that trust and respect could exist between such different beings, he would face it head-on. The council's leader, a stoic, stone-skinned creature, raised a hand, signaling silence. "It is decided," he intoned. "In 3 cycles, David Carlson and the Cathar, known as Nira, shall undertake a trial of bond and trust. The council shall bear witness, and if they succeed, it will stand as a testament to the possibility of alliances previously unimagined." David inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Council Leader. Nira and I will be ready." Torvak's expression darkened, a mixture of skepticism and a strange sense of loss flickering across his face. "Understand this, human," he warned, his voice laced with steel. "This trial will not be a simple exercise. You are stepping into an arena where no one will save you if you falter." David met met Torvak's gaze without flinching. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The council members dispersed, each retreating into their private discussions and musings. As they exited the chamber, whispers and glances followed David and Nira, their every movement scrutinized. David placed a reassuring hand on Nira's head, a silent promise of the journey they were about to undertake together. It was no longer just about proving a point. It was about standing for something greater. The bond between them had begun, and in the trials ahead, they would need to rely on each other in ways that neither could yet fully understand. 3 days later, David and Nira stood at the edge of a simulated forest environment within the Council's expansive trial grounds. The surroundings were lush and dense, with towering alien flora and shadowy undergrowth designed to mimic the wilderness of remote, uninhabited planets. The council members observed from a high balcony, each eager to see whether this unusual bond would withstand the trials set before them. Councillor Torvak watched with particular intensity, his arms crossed as his gaze fixed on David and Nira below. The first trial was simple in theory: navigate through the forest together and reach the end point. However, the path was littered with hazards, traps, and obstacles that would require close cooperation and a mutual reliance on each other's skill. For David, it would mean trusting Nira's instincts. For Nira, it meant accepting guidance from her human companion, a concept foreign to a Cathar, a species known for their fierce independence. The forest was eerily silent as David and Nira stepped into its depths, leaving the last traces of the council's murmuring behind. David glanced down at Nira, whose sharp, predatory gaze scanned the terrain with precision. Her body moved with a smooth, calculated grace, her muscles tensing at the slightest hint of movement in the shadows. David knew she was built for survival, but he was uncertain how she would react to relying on him if things became truly dangerous. As they ventured deeper, David noticed the ground underfoot becoming uneven, with tangled roots and slippery patches of moss making their progress slower. He was careful with his steps, mindful of the risk of injury, while Nira navigated the terrain effortlessly, her claws digging into the soil for traction. David could tell that she was attuned to every sound, every shift in the underbrush, a natural hunter ready to pounce at any moment. The forest trial was activating her instincts, and he hoped that those instincts included some level of trust in him. They came upon their first real challenge soon enough. A wide, rocky ravine stretched before them, too far to jump across and too steep to descend without careful planning. David surveyed the ravine, noting a narrow, unstable-looking bridge that spanned the gap. The bridge was made from interwoven vines and branches, swaying precariously in the faint breeze. It was clearly not built to withstand the weight of a creature like Nira. David turned to Nira, assessing the situation. "Looks like we have two choices," he murmured, though he knew she likely couldn't understand his words. "We either risk the bridge or find another way around." Nira sniffed the air, her gaze shifting toward the bridge. David could sense her unease. Cathars were not naturally inclined to depend on anything fragile or uncertain. They preferred solid ground beneath their feet, the ability to rely on their own strength. But David couldn't see any other options that wouldn't take hours to navigate. Slowly, he stepped onto the bridge, testing its strength. It creaked underfoot, but it held. David looked back at Nira, who remained at the edge, watching him intently. "Come on, Nira," he coaxed, extending his hand in a gesture of encouragement. "Trust me, we can do this together." Nira hesitated, a low rumble of uncertainty escaping her throat. But David didn't waver, holding her gaze with calm determination. After a tense moment, she took a tentative step onto the bridge, her claws digging into the vines for stability. The structure creaked louder under her weight, but she continued, inching forward, her eyes fixed on David's outstretched hand. Halfway across, the bridge began to sway more violently. David held his breath, instinctively reaching out to steady Nira. She faltered, a deep growl escaping her, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she focused on David's face, as if drawing courage from his unwavering presence. With a final, delicate step, they reached the other side, the bridge settling into stillness behind them. David exhaled, giving Nira a quick scratch behind her jaw in silent praise. She responded with a soft rumble, an acknowledgement of their shared accomplishment. Their cooperation was put to the test again and again, as they continued through the forest. They faced sudden drops camouflaged by thick foliage, predator simulations that lunged from the shadows, and even blinding flashes of light meant to disorient them. Each time, they adjusted to each other's strengths, moving as one. David found himself relying on Nira's instincts more than he expected, while Nira seemed to gradually accept his guidance. At one point, a simulated creature burst from the underbrush, a hulking beast with snarling jaws and bristling fur. It lunged at David, catching him off guard. But before he could react, Nira sprang forward, placing herself between him and the threat. Her powerful tail whipped around, knocking the creature back into the shadows. She let out a low, threatening growl, her stance fierce and protective. David stared at her, momentarily stunned. It wasn't just that she had defended him, it was the way she had done it, as though she considered him worth protecting. This wasn't a Cathar's instinct. It was something deeper, something he hadn't anticipated. "Thanks, Nira," he murmured, feeling a rush of gratitude that surprised him. She responded with a short nod, a gesture that seemed almost understanding. The council members watching from above exchanged whispers of intrigue. For creatures as independent as the Cathar, forming a bond with an outsider was unheard of. Yet here was Nira, a creature known for her lethality, showing not only tolerance but also a level of camaraderie with a human. The last challenge of the trial came in the form of a rock slide, triggered as they neared the exit point. A sudden cascade of boulders and debris tumbled down, separating David and Nira. David found himself trapped on one side, with no clear path to reach Nira. She, in turn, was stranded on the other side, watching him with visible distress. "Nira!" David called out, trying to find a way around the rocks, but each attempt only seemed to destabilize the pile further, threatening to trap them both. Nira paced along the edge, her eyes fixed on David, a low whine escaping her throat. In a moment that defied all logic, Nira leaped onto the rocks, clawing her way toward him, dodging falling debris with agile movements. She reached David's side, nudging him back to safety, her body shielding him from the falling stones. Together, they managed to retreat from the danger, finding a clear path forward. As they exited the forest trial, exhausted but unscathed, a collective murmur of astonishment spread through the council. Councillor Torvak watched in stunned silence, grappling with the undeniable proof of their bond. David looked down at Nira, his hand resting on her head in silent acknowledgement. They had completed the trial not as handler and beast, but as true partners, each trusting the other in ways they hadn't anticipated. For the first time, David sensed that the council wasn't just watching with curiosity. They were witnessing the beginning of something transformative. And as he and Nira left the trial grounds, he knew that their bond had only grown stronger, forged through shared challenges and an unspoken promise of loyalty. David squinted against the intense glare of the twin suns overhead, the relentless heat beating down on him as he and Nira trekked across the vast, desolate expanse of the desert planet, Akris. The sand stretched for miles in every direction, shifting underfoot and creating a near-endless series of dunes. The harsh conditions were unforgiving, and with each step, the difficulty of the final trial became more apparent. They had been dropped into the middle of this wasteland, with limited supplies and no clear direction, left to rely solely on their instincts and each other to survive. The council members observed from a hidden location, able to monitor their progress but unable to intervene. This trial, designed to test endurance and the depth of their bond, demanded a level of cooperation that would push David and Nira to their limits. The council leader had made it clear. This was the final, most challenging test. Surviving the desert and reaching the extraction point would demonstrate whether their bond was genuine and strong enough to overcome the harshest conditions. David wiped a layer of sweat from his brow, looking over at Nira, who seemed unfazed by the heat. Her scales absorbed the sun's rays, shimmering with an almost iridescent quality, and she moved across the sand with an effortless grace. Her natural adaptations, made her well-suited for this environment, but David knew that even she would face challenges in a place as hostile as this. "All right, Nira," he murmured, his voice dry and cracked from thirst. "Let's keep moving. We'll need to find water soon, or this trial will be over before it even begins." Nira tilted her head slightly, as if understanding his words. With a low rumble, she took the lead, sniffing the air and scanning the horizon. David fell into step beside her, grateful for her guidance. He knew that without her, his chances of navigating the desert would be slim at best. Every instinct told him to rely on her experience, to trust that her senses would guide them to what they needed. Hours passed, and the relentless sun drained David's energy. Each step felt heavier than the last, his body growing weaker with every mile. Nira, however, remained vigilant, her gaze sharp as she scanned the dunes. She stopped suddenly, her ears flicking forward. David followed her gaze and saw a faint shimmer in the distance, a mirage or, hopefully, water. Pushing through his exhaustion, David quickened his pace, following Nira's lead as she led them toward the shimmering oasis. As they neared, he felt a surge of relief. This was no mirage. It was a small pool of water nestled between two dunes, partially shaded by a few hardy, alien shrubs that clung to life in the arid soil. David sank to his knees beside the pool, cupping his hands to drink. The water was warm and tasted faintly of minerals, but it was life-giving. Nira waited patiently as he drank, her eyes watchful as though she were guarding him. Once he'd had his fill, she leaned down to drink, her powerful jaws parting to lap at the water. The sight filled David with a renewed appreciation for her strength and resilience. As night fell, the temperature in the desert dropped drastically, turning from scorching heat to biting cold. David shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter around him, but Nira moved closer, positioning herself beside him to provide warmth. Her body radiated a gentle heat, a surprising contrast to the icy air. David rested against her, grateful for the comfort. They took turns keeping watch, a silent understanding between them. Nira's instincts guided her through the unfamiliar desert, and David trusted her implicitly. In the stillness of the night, he found himself speaking softly to her, sharing stories of Earth's deserts, of humanity's own trials of survival. She listened, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight, a quiet companion in the darkness. The days blurred together as they continued their journey across the desert, facing trials that tested both their endurance and their trust in each other. They encountered strange desert creatures that scuttled across the sand, venomous and territorial. At one point, they came across a pit of quicksand that nearly swallowed David whole, but Nira had reacted instantly, gripping his arm in her powerful jaws and pulling him to safety. He barely had time to process the narrow escape before they were on the move again, more aware than ever of the dangers lurking beneath the surface. Their food rations dwindled quickly, and they were forced to hunt. Nira's keen senses and predatory skills proved invaluable as she stalked small creatures hidden among the dunes. She would bring her catch to David, allowing him to prepare it. Though the meals were meager, they were enough to keep him going, each bite a testament to their cooperation. One evening, as they rested beneath a rocky overhang, David looked at Nira with a deep sense of gratitude. "You're not just a companion out here, Nira," he said softly, his voice rough from the desert air. "You're a partner. I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Nira tilted her head, her expression almost curious. A low, contented rumble escaped her, and she nudged him gently with her snout. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, a rare moment of affection from a creature known for its ferocity. On the final day of their journey, as they approached the extraction point, David felt the toll of the desert weighing heavily on him. His legs trembled with each step, his vision blurred, and he could feel the relentless heat sapping his strength. Just as he thought he couldn't go any further, his body gave in, and he collapsed to his knees in the sand. Nira stopped, turning back to him. Her eyes narrowed as she watched him struggle, and with a determination born of their shared trials, she lowered her body beside him. With one powerful nudge, she coaxed him to his feet, supporting him as he leaned against her. Together, they took the final steps toward the extraction point, Nira bearing much of his weight as they reached their destination. When they arrived, The council members waiting at the extraction point were silent, watching in astonishment as David and Nira emerged from the desert, weary but victorious. Counselor Torvak's eyes widened at the sight, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. This wasn't just a demonstration of survival. It was proof of a bond that defied every expectation. The council leader stepped forward, his gaze shifting between David and Nira. "You have endured the trials of Akris, not as predator and prey, but as equals. This bond, it is unlike anything we have ever seen." David nodded, his hand resting on Nira's head in silent acknowledgement. "We relied on each other," he said simply. "Nira's instincts and strength, my resilience, together we made it through." Torvak approached them, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You have done what no one thought possible. Nira, a Cathar of unmatched ferocity, has chosen you as her partner." David met Torvak's gaze, understanding the weight of those words. This was more than a bond of survival. It was a shift in understanding, a testament to the potential for unity across species. The council members exchanged looks of wonder and respect. David and Nira had not only passed the trial, but they had also demonstrated a new way forward, a path that transcended the boundaries of species and nature itself. As they prepared to return to the council chamber, David knew that they had left a mark on history, one that would ripple across the galaxy in ways no one could yet imagine. David and Nira stepped back into the council chamber, weary yet triumphant. The journey through the desert had taken its toll, evident in the slight limp in David's step and the dust coating Nira's scales. Yet, as they entered, there was a newfound energy between them, a bond that had been forged through trials and trust. The council members, seated in their elevated circle around the chamber, fell silent at their approach. A mixture of respect and astonishment reflected on each face. Counselor Torvak watched them closely, his expression unreadable. The once skeptical representative of the Zarlan species, who had initially scoffed at the idea of a human bonding with a Cathar, now regarded David and Nira with an intensity that bordered on reverence. For Torvak, witnessing Nira's loyalty and David's resilience had been transformative, challenging his deeply held beliefs about strength, loyalty, and interspecies relationships. The council leader, his stone-skinned visage solemn, rose from his seat, addressing the chamber in a voice that echoed across the vast space. "Today, we bear witness to an unprecedented achievement," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. "The trials set before David Carlson and Nira were designed to test the limits of their bond. They have not only survived, but have shown us something greater, a partnership built on mutual respect and trust." A murmur of agreement rippled through the council. Representatives from various species exchanged nods and whispered remarks, their initial doubts and skepticism replaced with admiration. The council members had expected to see the bond fail under pressure, to watch as Nira's instincts overpowered any hint of loyalty to a human. But the opposite had occurred. Through each trial, David and Nira had proven that their connection was not fleeting or circumstantial, but rooted in something deeper. Torvak stepped forward, his expression a mixture of pride and a humility he rarely displayed. "Human David," he began, his voice softer than usual, "you have done what no one believed possible. Nira, a creature of unparalleled ferocity, has accepted you not only as a companion, but as an equal. You have earned her trust, and in doing so, you have challenged the foundation of what we believed was possible between our species." David met Torvak's gaze, sensing the sincerity in his words. "Thank you, Counselor Torvak," he replied. "But this isn't just about me or Nira. It's about the potential for all of us to connect, to understand each other beyond our differences." Torvak nodded slowly, visibly moved. He turned to address the council, his tone steady and authoritative. "Perhaps it is time for us to reconsider our views on alliances. If a human and a Cathar can form such a bond, then what other connections might we be ignoring out of prejudice or tradition?" The council leader raised a hand, signaling for quiet, as the chamber buzzed with the implications of Torvak's statement. "David Carlson," he said, his voice solemn. "We have witnessed your courage and your compassion. You and Nira have shown us a new path, one that could redefine how we view alliances and cooperation among species. The Council has agreed to endorse an initiative inspired by your example, a program to foster interspecies partnerships across the galaxy." A wave of astonishment and approval washed over the Council, followed by enthusiastic applause. David felt a swell of pride, not just for himself but for Nira, whose presence by his side had transformed an impossible idea into a reality. He glanced down at her, meeting her calm, golden gaze. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of the journey they had undertaken together, and he knew that this bond would resonate far beyond the trials they had faced. The Council leader continued, his tone resolute. "The intergalactic bonding initiative will bring representatives from various species to work with creatures once considered untamable or too dangerous. This program will be an opportunity for us to learn, to grow, and to challenge our assumptions about strength and loyalty. David Carlson, we ask that you lead this initiative as its ambassador." David's eyes widened in surprise, the weight of the responsibility settling over him. He looked around the chamber, at the expectant faces of the Council members, at Nira, and back at Torvak, who gave him a nod of approval. Taking a steadying breath, David stepped forward. "I am honored," he began, his voice carrying across the chamber. "If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that strength doesn't come from control or dominance. It comes from understanding, from seeing others as they are and respecting them for it. I believe that, together, we can build a galaxy where bonds like the one Nira and I share are possible for all species." The chamber erupted in applause, a powerful acknowledgement of David's words and the significance of his journey. As the applause faded, Councillor Torvak approached him, extending his hand in a rare display of camaraderie. David shook his hand firmly, sensing a newfound respect between them. "David," Torvak said quietly, his voice barely audible over the murmurs of the Council, "you have changed not only Nira, but also my understanding of loyalty and partnership. I look forward to seeing where this path leads." David smiled, feeling a genuine warmth in Torvak's words. "Thank you, Counselor. I couldn't have done this without Nira, and without the challenges you set before us." As the session concluded, Council members approached David and Nira, offering words of encouragement and curiosity about the initiative. Representatives from dozens of worlds expressed interest in participating, eager to explore the possibilities that had been unlocked by David and Nira's bond. Hours later, when the chamber had emptied, David found himself alone in a quiet corner of the Council's gardens, with Nira by his side. The stars stretched out above them, a shimmering canvas that reminded him of the vastness of the galaxy and the journey still ahead. He reached out, running his hand along Nira's scales, feeling the familiar warmth beneath his touch. "We did it, Nira," he said softly. "We showed them that trust can break down barriers, that maybe we're not so different after all." Nira rumbled softly in response, her eyes half closed in contentment. She shifted closer, her large frame settling beside him, an unmistakable gesture of companionship. As they sat together beneath the stars, David felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that their journey was only beginning. The intergalactic bonding initiative would take him and Nira to worlds they had never seen, to species they had never met. Each step a chance to strengthen the unity of the galaxy, and every connection forged, every barrier broken, would be a testament to the bond they had built, one rooted in trust, respect, and understanding. David gazed out at the stars, Nira by his side, as the weight of their accomplishment settled into his heart. They had proven that even the most unlikely of allies could stand together, united in a purpose greater than themselves. And as the stars above glimmered like silent witnesses, David knew that this was just the beginning of a galaxy transformed by a simple act of kindness and a partnership that defied all odds.